The dawn broke over the Trojan plain with a strange hush. The sun rose behind the walls of Troy, gilding its towers in light that shimmered like bronze, yet the city did not rejoice. It was the light of war, and the people of Troy felt it in their bones. Within the high walls the city stirred with unease. Women moved through the courtyards carrying jugs of water, but their hands trembled, spilling droplets on the stone. Children clutched at their mothers' robes, whispering questions that had no answers. Priests lit fires in the temples, offering sacrifices of bulls and lambs to Apollo, Athena, and Poseidon. Their voices rose in chant, thick with incense smoke, pleading for the gods to guard their walls from the enemy that had settled like a plague across the beach. On the battlements, sentinels peered down across the wide plain. There, like a sea of iron and bronze, sprawled the Greek encampment. Rows of black ships sat on the shore, drawn up from the surf as though they had crawled onto land like great sea beasts. Between the ships the camp seethed with warriors. Smoke curled from cooking fires, banners flickered in the early light, and the faint clang of hammer on metal rang as armor was mended. As spearheads were sharpened, the Greeks had come not as raiders, but as an army of kings. Men from every corner of the Aegean had gathered beneath Agamemnon's banner. Men from Sparta, Argos, Ithaca, Thessaly, and beyond. They had crossed the sea with one purpose, to reclaim Helen, the stolen queen, and to humble proud Troy. Yet among themselves, unity was brittle, pride and rivalry cut as sharp as any spear. In the heart of the camp, Agamemnon, High King of Mycenae, stood tall among his generals. His voice carried over the rows of men as he issued commands, his eyes never straying from the walls of Troy. To him, this war was more than vengeance. It was dominion. To see Troy humbled would be to see his own name carved into the memory of ages. By his side stood Menelaus, his brother, whose face bore a fire different from Agamemnon's cold ambition. His was a wound of the heart, raw and unhealed. Helen, his wife, had been taken by Paris, son of Priam, and with her had gone Menelaus's honor. Every moment that passed, every breath he drew, burned with the need for vengeance. Elsewhere, among the Myrmidons, Achilles stood silent. The son of Peleus and the sea goddess Thetis, he shone with a brilliance that seemed more than mortal. His armor caught the first rays of the sun, and even in stillness, he radiated a presence that stirred both awe and unease. Unlike Agamemnon or Menelaus, Achilles fought not for dominion nor for stolen love. He fought for glory, for the immortality promised in song. The war to him was a forge, and in its fire his name would be tempered to last beyond the ages. The air was thick with expectation. The first days of battle had been bloody but indecisive. The Greeks had pressed against the walls, only to be hurled back by Trojan valor. The Trojans had sallied forth, only to be driven again behind their gates. The war had not yet chosen its heroes nor its victims, but on this day the air itself seemed to know fate was preparing to speak. From the Scaean gate of Troy the sound of horns blared. The bronze notes cut through the morning silence, echoing across the plain, and every head turned toward the city. The gate opened, and out rode a herald bearing a staff of peace. He halted midway between the walls and the Greek lines, his voice rising to carry across the distance. He bore a message from Prince Hector, the first son of Priam, commander of Troy's armies. The words he spoke were simple, yet heavy with ancient weight. Let one champion of Greece face one champion of Troy. Let the outcome of their duel decide the fate of the war, or at least this day. Let blood be shed by heroes, not by countless men. A hush fell upon the Greek camp. The warriors looked to their lords, and the lords looked to one another. The challenge of champions was old as war itself. It was not merely a contest of strength, but a trial of honor. To refuse would be to show weakness. To accept would mean one man's life might turn the tide of armies. Agamemnon's face hardened. He turned to his captains, but before he could speak, Menelaus stepped forward. His voice cut the silence like a blade. He would fight. He would face Paris, the thief of his wife, the defiler of his house. No other duel was worthy, no other combat as just. The Greek army roared its approval. This was the moment Menelaus had awaited since the ships first left Sparta. His hand closed around his spear with the strength of wrath long held in check. From the walls of Troy the gates opened wider. Out rode Paris, the prince who had brought Helen to Troy. The crowd upon the battlements cheered, their voices rising to the sky. Yet within that cheer was unease. For Paris was beautiful, yes, golden-haired, his face untouched by scars, his form light and swift. But beauty does not win wars. The people remembered Hector's courage, Aeneas's strength, Sarpedon's wisdom. Paris was not like them. He was favored by Aphrodite, but to many he was not favored by fate. As Paris walked onto the field, he lifted his head proudly, his gaze fixed on Menelaus. Yet within his chest his heart beat fast, for he knew the fury he faced. Menelaus's shoulders were broad as an ox, his arms scarred by years of war, his eyes like embers burning in ash. The field cleared. Both armies stood silent. The wind stirred the dust. Above, the gods leaned closer, their immortal eyes fixed upon the plain, for they too knew that this duel was more than a fight between men. It was the first spark of a fire that would consume Troy. The two armies drew back, leaving the wide plain between them empty, save for the two princes who now faced one another. The earth seemed to hold its breath. The sea breeze that swept across the shore fell still, as if even the waves of the Aegean paused to watch. Paris stood with head high, his armor gleaming, his bow slung across his shoulder, a spear in his hand. His beauty was dazzling, the sort sung of by poets, the kind that draws the eyes of goddesses. Yet as Menelaus strode forth to meet him, his steps heavy as thunder, many Trojans on the walls felt their cheer falter. For beauty is not strength, and glory is not born from favor alone. Menelaus's shield shone broad as a door, its bronze rim scarred by battles past. His hand gripped a spear thick as a sapling, and upon his head his helmet gleamed with horsehair crest. The weight of betrayal, of 10 years of shame pressed behind every step he took. This was not only combat. This was vengeance. The heralds advanced to the center, carrying the staffs of truce. Their voices rang out, calling the gods to witness. Sworn oaths were spoken. Should Paris fall, Helen and her wealth would be restored to Menelaus, and Troy would pay recompense. Should Menelaus fall, the Greeks would depart in peace. The oaths were made, but in heaven the gods stirred uneasily, for they knew oaths sworn by men are often broken, and fate does not bend to bargains. The heralds withdrew. Silence fell again. Paris lifted his spear. His eyes narrowed, and with a sudden cry he cast it. The shaft whistled through the air and struck Menelaus's shield. Bronze rang on bronze, but the spear glanced away, leaving only a shallow mark. Menelaus did not falter. With a roar he hurled his own spear. It flew true, driving through Paris's shield, splintering its wood and cutting a shallow line across his side. Paris gasped, stumbling back, pain and fear flashing across his face. The Greeks shouted triumph, their voices shaking the plain. Menelaus pressed forward, his sword flashing as he drew it from his side. He struck once, twice, the blows crashing against Paris's shield, breaking it to fragments. Desperation filled Paris's eyes. He retreated step by step, as Menelaus bore down on him like a lion upon a stag. Then Menelaus leapt, his hand seizing the crest of Paris's helmet. With a violent wrench, he dragged the Trojan prince from his feet. Dust rose as Paris fell, his knees buckling, his hands clawing at the strap that held the helmet fast beneath his chin. Menelaus hauled him across the ground toward the Greek lines, the crowd roaring, the Trojans crying out in horror. It seemed the duel was ended. The dishonor would be washed away. Paris would die on Trojan soil, and with him the cause of war. But the eyes of Aphrodite, goddess of love, burned with fury. Paris was her chosen, her prize, the man for whom she had risked the judgment of gods. She would not see him cut down by mortal hands. In a sudden shimmer unseen by mortal eyes, she broke the chin strap of Paris's helmet. The leather snapped, the helmet tore free in Menelaus's grip, and Paris slipped away into a cloud of mist. Menelaus hurled the empty helm aside and struck at the dust, but his foe was gone. The Greeks roared in outrage. Menelaus stood bewildered, his sword dripping sweat and dust, his heart pounding with fury. He raised his voice to the heavens, calling for the Trojans to return Paris, to honor their oath, to yield the prize that was his by right. But Paris was not on the field. Aphrodite had carried him within the walls of Troy, setting him in Helen's chambers. There he sat, pale and trembling, his pride bruised though his body lived. Helen, seeing him, turned her face away in shame, for she too had watched from the walls and knew the truth of his weakness. On the plain, the heralds conferred. The duel had been declared. Menelaus had triumphed, yet the prize was withheld. The Trojans wavered, their hearts torn between honor and survival. Agamemnon's voice rose over the field, demanding victory be acknowledged. The Greeks clamored for Troy's submission, but in the high halls of Olympus, Hera and Athena, goddesses who hated Troy, whispered to Zeus. They would not allow the war to end in this hour. Too much had been woven, too many threads yet to be cut, and so the gods prepared to break the fragile truce, to hurl both armies again into the furnace of battle. Menelaus still stood upon the blood-stained earth, his chest heaving, his eyes burning with fury. His hand clutched his sword, but his enemy had vanished like smoke on the wind. Around him the Greek soldiers shouted with righteous anger, their voices carrying across the plain. "Paris has fallen," they cried. "Menelaus has won. Return Helen as sworn. Honor the oath." Their cries echoed against the walls of Troy, and within those walls the people murmured uneasily. Many had watched from the battlements, their eyes straining as Paris faltered, their hearts sinking as Menelaus dragged him like prey across the ground. They had seen their prince fall. They had seen his life spared not by his own valor, but by some unseen hand of the gods. Whispers spread among the Trojans, "He is not a warrior. He brought this war upon us." Yet another man bore his shame. Why should Troy suffer for Paris's weakness? Helen herself, standing upon the high tower with Priam and the elders, felt her cheeks burn with shame. She had seen all. She had seen Menelaus's strength, the fury of his arm, the justice of his cause. She had seen Paris falter and fall, saved only by divine favor. Her heart twisted with sorrow, for she knew the eyes of Troy now turned on her with scorn. Below, the Greek kings gathered around Agamemnon. His voice rang out across the plain, commanding silence. "Trojans, the duel has been fought. The victor stands before you. By oath sworn before the gods, you must now yield Helen and her wealth and spare yourselves the ruin of war. To deny it is to betray the gods themselves." His words were heavy with truth. Many Trojans shifted uneasily, for oaths carried weight in the ancient world, and all had sworn upon them. Yet in the council of heaven the gods did not agree. On Olympus Zeus sat in majesty, watching the field below. "Shall we end the war now," he mused aloud, "and spare the sons of men their slaughter?" But Hera's eyes burned with wrath, and Athena's voice was sharp as a blade. "No," said Hera, "let Troy burn. Let its towers fall, for Paris's insult must not go unpunished." "No," echoed Athena. "Let the war continue. The duel is not enough. The greater champions must yet clash." Zeus sighed, knowing the storm could not be calmed, and he turned his gaze back to earth. And so the truce was broken not by men but by the will of gods. A Trojan archer, stirred by Athena's whisper, bent his bow and let fly an arrow. It streaked across the sky and struck a Greek warrior, not mortally but enough to draw blood. The cry went up, "The Trojans have broken the truce." In a heartbeat the plain erupted. Spears were lifted, shields raised, chariots rolled forward. The clash of armies filled the air once more. The duel that should have ended the war had instead unleashed greater fury. Hector, hearing the cries, strode forth among the Trojans. His brow was dark, his voice stern as he called his men to arms. "Paris may falter," he said, "but Troy does not stand on Paris alone. It stands on us, on every son of this city, on every hand that lifts a spear. Fight now and prove that Troy is no man's prize, but the pride of her people." The Trojans answered with a roar, their spirits lifted by Hector's strength. For though Paris was a prince, Hector was their shield. Where Paris embodied beauty, Hector embodied honor. Where Paris drew scorn, Hector drew respect. And so the armies surged once more into battle, the ground trembling beneath their march, the air filled with the crash of bronze and the cries of men. The duel of champions had ended, but it had not brought peace. Instead, it had lit the fire that would burn until Troy's fate was sealed. Above it all, the gods looked on, each choosing their favorites, each whispering into mortal hearts, each bending the tide of war toward their own designs. The game was not over. The game had only just begun. As the dust of battle rose once more, the Trojan plain became a furnace of clashing steel and roaring men. Yet among the chaos, two figures stood apart in the minds of all who watched. For though Paris and Menelaus had fought, their contest had not quenched the fire. Instead, it had revealed a truth. The fate of Troy would not be decided by those two men. It would still be decided by greater champions still. Hector, son of Priam, strode among the ranks of his soldiers. His spear gleamed. His shield rang as he struck it with his hand, and his voice carried above the din. "Stand firm, sons of Troy! Hold fast, for the walls behind you are your homes, your wives, your children. If we fall, all falls. But if we endure, our names will shine forever." To the men of Troy, Hector was more than a prince. He was their bulwark, their hope, the one who bore their honor on his shoulders. Priam ruled from the palace. Paris dreamed in Helen's arms, but Hector lived and bled with the soldiers. They followed him not because he was heir, but because he was theirs. Yet in his heart Hector felt the weight of fate. He had seen his brother falter, seen the gods pluck him from defeat like a child from fire. He knew Paris would not save Troy. That burden was his and his alone. And though he fought with strength unmatched, in the stillness of night he sometimes wondered if even he could bear it. Far across the plain, in the camp of the Greeks, another figure brooded in silence. Achilles, son of Peleus, sat apart from the kings, his hands restless on the hilt of his sword. He had not fought in the duel. He had not yet been called to prove himself. But his eyes had watched, his heart stirred by the cries of battle, and deep within him the thirst for glory grew. Achilles was unlike other men. His mother was Thetis, a goddess of the sea, and he had been touched by destiny since birth. He knew, as did all, that his life would not be long. But in that short span, he would carve a name so mighty it would never be forgotten. Watching Paris falter, watching Menelaus rage, watching Hector rise, all these things fanned the fire in his soul. He longed for his hour, for the duel that would echo through the ages. Among the gods, whispers passed like winds over high mountains. Hera and Athena spoke of Hector and Achilles, of the clash yet to come, of blood spilled that would stain the plain for generations. Aphrodite clung to Paris, vowing to shield him again, though the others mocked her. Ares sharpened his spear, eager for the slaughter. And Zeus, who sees all, remained silent. His eyes heavy with knowledge he alone carried, for he knew that the duel of Paris and Menelaus had been but the opening note. The true song of Troy, the song of wrath and ruin, had not yet begun. It would be sung when Hector and Achilles met upon the field. One would fall, and with him would fall the hope of a city. And so the battle raged on, but its meaning had shifted. Every clash of bronze, every cry of the dying, every prayer whispered to the heavens was but a prelude to the greater contest. The armies fought, the walls held, the ships waited on the shore, but in every heart, both Trojan and Greek, the same thought burned.